Hello, all of my wonderful Italian American newsletter subscribers. This is Gina here, and I thought I would try this out. I'm going to read a passage from Mount Allegro, and I have chosen Uncle Nino and Aunt Giovanna. In spite of his superior intellect, Uncle Nino never learned much English, chiefly because of an old grudge he bore against his wife. Whenever he quarreled with her, he would shout that he had never intended to come to America in the first place, and only did so because she so blinded him that he could not distinguish between love and common sense. Even when he was not quarreling with her, you would have surmised from hearing him talk that he was through with America and was returning to Sicily the very next day. Since he had ranted in much the same way for nearly 20 years, none of his relatives, least of all his wife, took him seriously. Yet the fact remained that during all that time, Uncle Nino considered himself little more than a transient who would someday persuade his wife that it would be far more comfortable to return to Sicily and live on the fat of the land he owned there than to exist in a callow city like Rochester and slave all week for a few strands of spaghetti. His arguments did not impress his wife, possibly because it was she and not he who slaved all week. My Aunt Giovanna sewed buttonholes in a tailor factory while he ran a small jewelry trade from his living room, an occupation that left him considerable time and energy to play briscola and threaten to leave America. It was quite true that if he had not met my Aunt Giovanna, he probably would never have set foot outside of Sicily. As a young man, he was managing a prosperous importing business in Palermo. So prosperous, my mother said, that he could bribe the judges to change their decisions. And then my Aunt Giovanna came along. She was in the throes of conspiring to secure admission into the United States, after having failed twice before. Both times her application had been rejected in the belief that she had trachoma, the eye disease that was often contracted by Sicilians living in towns where the water was bad. On her first attempt to get to America, she actually got as far as Ellis Island. But American officials seemed less susceptible to her beauty than the Italian officials who had gallantly helped to smuggle her through the red tape in Palermo. Ellis Island was little more than a prison in those days. For 8 days, she spent her time looking through iron bars at the Statue of Liberty and the New York skyline and weeping. Every morning, an Irish policewoman who spoke Italian tried to make her tell how she got on the boat without a passport, but my aunt never told. Finally, the immigration officials realized they were wasting their time and shipped Aunt Giovanna back to Palermo. When my Uncle Nino proposed 3 days after he met her, she consented, but only on condition that he take her to America. He gave up his thriving business, married her, and took her on a honeymoon to France, where they thought she would stand a better chance of getting a passport. At Havre, she was again turned down. Uncle Nino got his passport without any trouble, but he saw little point in leaving his bride behind to go to a country that didn't particularly attract him. My Aunt Giovanna was never lacking in stubbornness. Against his better judgment, she persuaded him to sail alone, arguing that once he was in the United States, it would be a simple matter for him to make arrangements to send for her. Was she not his wife? Surely American officials could not be so heartless as to permit red tape to separate newlyweds. Uncle Nino loved his wife too much to argue with her. But Her reasoning proved faulty. Uncle Nino's presence in the United States did not stir up any sentiments American officials might have for young newlyweds. He spent a miserable year in New York, filling out endless forms, pining for his bride, and cursing the moment he had given in to her arguments. He was about to return to Europe and take her back to Sicily when word came that Aunt Giovanna had been able to persuade the French immigration officials that there was nothing wrong with her eyes, that a less tearful existence could not remedy. He had never forgiven her for those lonely months he spent in New York waiting for her. And after 20 years of America, he was still angry with her for having wrenched him away from a successful career to a makeshift existence in a strange land where he had to depend largely on his wife's earnings. And there's my passage for today, a little taste of the wonderful book, MountAllegro. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll get it at the library or download it onto your Kindle and read it yourself. See you next week.